Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates. With your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have the guru. I have the creator of Spelling to Communicate, Elizabeth Vosseller. I'm so happy to have you here today. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
So I've been doing a series and talking to people about spelling to communicate. And I said, I've got to get Elizabeth on here so we can talk about what spelling to communicate, or S2C, actually is and how it works. I usually always start my interviews in the very beginning, and I try to backtrack a little bit to try to find out a little bit of background about you and who you are and how you got into what you're doing now. So if you want to share a little bit about that. I know you were a speech language pathologist, correct? Right?
Yes.
So yeah, so tell us how we got from there to where we are now.
Great. So I'm still a speech language pathologist. I've been practicing for nearly 30 years. I've always worked with people with complex communication needs. My first job was at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Then I was a professor at George Washington University for 12 years, teaching speech language pathology to undergrad and master's students, and then also in the Graduate School of Education and Human Development, teaching special education to master's level educators. So I've been in this field for a long time, and then after being at GW, I went full-time in private practice. Even when I was teaching, I had some part-time private practice because I love being with the folks that I work with. So I always had to have a hand in it. And for most of my career, for about 19 years of my career, I practiced pretty traditional speech and language. I was using a wide range of techniques. And again, I've always kind of ended up with people with more complex communication needs, so non-speaking, or autistic plus, other things going on, or people with craniofacial cleft palate issues, or people with genetic syndromes. So that's always been the area where I've worked. And for so long, for people who couldn't communicate by their mouth, I could only get so far, right? We would work for years and years and years, a lot of work on receptive language, trying to work on expressive and building speech, but just getting minimal gains. And it wasn't until I changed everything that I started getting good results. So I like to say that for 19 years of my career, I practiced wrong. I was wrong. And once I changed everything, I've been on a mission to change the way that I approach and that other people approach people who are not able to effectively communicate via speech.
Mm-hmm. And what brought about the change?
Seeing that I just wasn't getting there. And the thing is, I never believed for a minute that the non-speaking, minimally speaking, or unreliably speaking people that I was working with were not smart. I had been outsmarted by them too many times, right? You know, I had people hacking into my phone and changing the language on my phone. You know, I would pull out therapy supplies to work with and then turn my back to pick up something else, and they'd hidden my supplies from me. So I knew that there were things going on. I also knew from having a conversation maybe with a parent that if I said something that was even subtly funny, that they would smile or respond to it. It wasn't like we were cracking up, right? It was just laughing because everybody else was laughing. So I knew that the light was in there, and I knew that there was more than I was able to get them to say with their mouth or demonstrate from their intelligence. And so it wasn't until I made a shift to teaching motor that all this happened. And I had been exposed to people who were using other means of spelling and typing, right? And seeing that there were people who were communicating. But for me, a real shift came when I went from working with people and thinking this was a cognitive issue to that it was a motor issue. And that shift changed everything.
Right. So I just want to back up for 1 second. You mentioned non-speaking, minimally speaking, and unreliable speaking. Now, I always just said that my son was nonverbal, but
Right.
that's the sort of universal word. But since I've been learning about S2C and I'm talking to people like Alexandra Simone, I have another episode with her on it. They use those terms and they split it up and they'll say, no, it's non-speaking, and to me, non-speaking sounds like they can speak, but they just won't. And the only reason my mind goes there is because I know of someone, she's perfectly capable of speaking. She just shuts down and she just won't. But
Right.
that's not
And that's
really what it
different
means. You could explain. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone who can speak but won't, that's a different term. And they use the term, in speech and language pathologists use the term selective mutism for that, right? And that's often has an anxiety base. It is an issue, right? It's not just like, oh, they're not cooperating. There's more to it than that.
Right.
Nonverbal actually means from Latin without words. And words are your language. If you choose to say, if I say, how are you today? And you choose to say, I'm excited, that's different than you choosing to say, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm a little blue. We choose that language. So if you say that someone is nonverbal, it means they have no words at all. There's none even in their head that they can use. So it's really a misnomer. It's a misuse of the term. To say that someone is non-speaking means that they have language, they have thoughts and ideas, they're capable of understanding, but they cannot use speech as a primary and effective means of communication. So just because you can't speak doesn't mean you don't have something to say, right? So
Right.
non-speaking is an umbrella term that's encompassing people who do not speak at all, who have minimal speech, which can be anything from a couple to a couple hundred words and phrases. And those are often words or phrases that have been practiced over and over and over again. So mom, all done, more, please, etc. To then those who are unreliably speaking. And that one's tricky because unreliable speakers are those who talk all the time, but it's not necessarily what they want to say. Sometimes it could be the polar opposite of what they want to say. So I have folks who say, all done, go home, go home, go home, go home. And then they'll spell, I'm having the best time ever. I'm so happy to be here. But their mouth is saying, go home, go home, go home.
Right.
I have other folks who will repeat questions over and over. When's mom coming? 3 o'clock. When's mom coming? 3 o'clock. When's mom coming? 3 o'clock. No matter how many times you answer it, they'll come back with the same question, right? I have another girl who I saw for a long, long time. She was one of my speech clients. We worked for years together, and she was one of the first people I started spelling with. And when she meets you for the first time, she'll get really close up in your face and say, mom coming, computer later, walk today, hair's pretty, and just dump all of this all at once. And when she became fluent on the boards, we asked her, why do you always do that? And she said, you guys taught me to greet people, and I'm saying all the things that I'm capable of saying, right? And that made so much sense. Of course you are. You're going up, and she would always, as soon as someone new would come in the room, boom, beeline up to them. But these were the things, she said, I'm saying all the things I can say. And that made a lot of sense. So unreliable talkers might be talking all the time, but they're not able to answer a novel or unique question like, who did you sit with at lunch today? What was the best part of your day, right? And so that's who we work with. So it's an umbrella term. We're not trying to pigeonhole people into these descriptions, but it's good for people to know, because sometimes people will say, well, my kid says a lot of things. He can't really tell me what's going on for him, but he talks, so S2C is not right for him. Well, no, S2C could be right for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's scripting as well.
Yes. Yes. And that tends to be kind of in the folks who are unreliable, or
Unreliable.
even
Mhm.
sometimes the minimal speakers will script as well too.
Right. Right.
But there's also a motor profile that's pretty apparent in the folks that we work with. I'll often say you could put one of, our non-speakers next to a same age peer and say, walk down the hall. And, even the mailman might say, you know what, that one walks a little differently, right? It's how they use their body, how they're moving, their movements that, for those of us who do this, I mean, I travel a lot, and I'll be at an airport, and just a sound or seeing someone, 1,000 feet away from me, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there's one of my people.
Exactly. I do the same thing. Yeah.
I
I'm like,
can
oh,
see
there's a
by the way
Robbie.
they move. Yeah, exactly. So you start to see that motor signature.
Mhm.
And it's exciting because we actually have researchers and folks out there who are starting to look at the motor signature that's apparent in some autistic people. Ultimately, the people that we work with have some degree of apraxia. And apraxia is a breakdown in motor planning. So there's a process called praxis that all of us do, right? Praxis means we go from an idea to a plan to executing that plan and then adapting that plan. So if I think to myself, I want a sip of my coffee, right? That's my idea. My plan is I have to reach out my hand to get it. So I execute that plan. I do it. And because I'm looking at you and not at my coffee cup, I miss the coffee cup, right? My hand is empty. I miss it. Now I adapt using my sensory information. So I can either look to where my coffee cup is and hone right in on it, or I can kind of pat around till I find the thing of it and I can bring it to my face. That's praxis. When you have a breakdown in that chain, and the breakdown happens, idea is fine, the plan is fine. The breakdown is between plan and executing that plan, and execution and adaptation, right? Because the sensory system is not giving good information.
Mm.
This is where our folks break down. So things that they've practiced over and over are automatic, right? Those words that come out easily and repetitively, those are automatic. They're bypassing planning. And if you give someone a novel task to do, right, which is often in the testing that they're given, then they have a hard time doing it.
Mhm.
So this breakdown is apraxia. Different disciplines have different words for it. Some people call it dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder, so forth. There's lots of different terms for it. We tend to use the word apraxia because that's most often referenced when you're talking about speech.
Right. Right. And I'm sure that's what my son Robbie had. And this is one of the reasons why I just want to know so much about this. And it's I have a lot of regret as a parent because I wish I knew about this 15, 20 years ago.
I wish I knew about it 19 years into my practice. I mean, for me, realizing that I had really missed the mark, I think is what drives me, and it continues to drive me. I work obsessively to trying to get this message to as many families as possible, to help as many non-speaking people as possible, make sure we have people trained to support non-speaking people. The mission of our nonprofit, which is I-ASC, the International Association for Spelling as Communication, is to increase access to communication through training, education, advocacy, and research. Those are our 4 pillars of how we're trying to make sure that everyone has access to communication. And again, it's my living amends, right? I had a guy who I'd been working with for years. He's in his mid-20s now. We started working together doing speech when he was 8 years old. And for years and years, I was working on things like in, on, under, basic pronouns, ing verbs, sitting, running, jumping, right? And his very first open sentence that he spelled was if I would have known, I would have done it myself. I about fell out of my chair. I mean, that was, first of all, he was one of my very early spellers. And second of all, that sentence is so grammatically complex, right? It's using reflexive pronouns, it's using complex grammatical structures. And as he became more and more fluent, there was a time he wrote a beautiful creative writing at the end of our session. And I was in tears. And I just said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that you knew all these things that I spent years trying to teach you.
Right.
I hope it wasn't horrible. And he looked at me and he spelled out on the board EV, which a lot of my clients called me that because of this guy, because Elizabeth Vosseller is also a mouthful. He spelled out EV. I knew you always loved me. You always treated me with respect, and you did the best you knew how to do.
Right.
And that really is my living amends, is it's a know better, do better, right? You know, I see you doing that too.
Yeah.
As we know better, we have to do better. And I think I always say that when you see someone spelling, you can't unsee it, right?
Yeah.
But you have a choice to make. You can choose to believe it or not. But if you believe it, you have to change everything, right? The way I practiced changed when I saw this. You know, when I started seeing this happening with my own clients, when I started seeing them communicate things or spell things that I don't even know what it is, you know, and I'll say, well, I'm not sure that's a word. And I had a guy Google it, right? And sure enough, I looked up the word and it's some weird concept car I'd never heard of before.
Right.
Or if you locked me up in a room, by the end of the day, I might be able to write you a very bad poem, you know, that's not particularly skilled. And I have spellers who whip out a poem in 15
Oh,
minutes.
yeah.
That
I mean,
is
I
just
see
not
what some
my
of these kids are spelling, like on Facebook, they've got their own pages and stuff, and they're
Yeah.
so poetic, you know, and it's so complex that I don't even understand what they're talking about half the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And from a speech and language point of view, from a language point, we see complex grammatical structures. We see complex phonology, which is ultimately what's involved in spelling, the rules for sequencing and combining sounds. I see that they don't make grammatical errors, right? They will never spell something like, I have 3 dogs.
Right.
They're going to make that plural because they don't make those kinds of mistakes. It shows me over and over that their language is intact. When they write an essay, it's well organized. I mean, right off the bat. And early on, I was still teaching some of those things like, oh, I must need to still teach you vocabulary and still teach you grammar and still teach you
Right.
to spell. And I learned really quickly, they're 5 steps ahead of me, you know? So I see that language is intact, it's speech that's affected. And these are 2 different areas of the brain where these functions happen.
Right. So it's not that it's not up here, it just can't get out here, which is the apraxia.
Exactly.
Right? And it's motor. So so explain to us, you know, what S2C is and how it works.
So S2C stands for spelling to communicate, and it works by teaching the motor. So let me put it in another context. Think about if you take your kid for piano lessons, right? Ultimately, you want them to play a concerto or some very elaborate piece, but that is not what they start with, right? I remember when I begged for piano lessons and you know, when I was, I don't know, 10 years old, and my piano teacher had me start on scales, and I'm like, oh, wait, I don't think you recognize my musical talents, you know, but you have to start simple, right? Anytime you learn a motor task, you start simple, like playing scales on the piano, 1 finger to 1 note. Then you learn chords. Then you bring in the other hand. Then the other 2 hands are doing something differently, right? And you progress up a hierarchy. Same if you play tennis or any other skill that you learn, right? You start easy, you get hard. We do the same thing in S2C. It's really about the motor. So we start easy with the alphabet split in 3 boards, into 3 stencils, right? That way you only have a field of 2 rows and 8 to 9 letters per board.
So I've seen those. So how does it work if they have to say a word that's in multiple boards?
Because you start with knowing the target, right? I mean, there's in S2C, we talk about the acquisition period and the application period. The acquisition period is getting accurate. So at first I might say, I'm doing a lesson about New York. New York City is a bustling center of business. Standout landmarks are the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, right? What state are we talking about? The only possible answer is New York. So I know I get the J to R board for the N, and then I get the A to I board for the E, and so forth, right? So I hand the board for the particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody becomes skilled at the 3 boards, because you have to scan 2 rows, right? And we teach very well for kids to start at the left, scan to the right, and touch every single thing in a row. We do not teach them to scan from right to left and up to down. So sometimes we even have to make an accommodation and cover 1 row and only work 1 row at a time. But we're going to teach in the acquisition period you accurately using your arm. So S2C takes the motor out of the very fine motor of the mouth, puts it in the gross motor of the arm.
Do they start with the pencil? Pushing the pencil through?
The pencil is a fake finger for many. We want to do it so that it comes straight out from the elbow, because this is the natural ergonomics of the body, right? Like your power walk move.
Right.
You can do this all day. So we position the board in front of the dominant hand, so with the elbow can go out easily without fatiguing the body.
Got it. So you don't put it up here in front of their face. You keep it down lower.
A small head turn allows the eyes to be in the right position, right? And that with that positioning and with the board in an upward, I have my 26 board on me. So we start with the 3 boards, but then we later move to the 26 board. Same idea. We don't move from 3 to 26 until you're really, really accurate on the 3 boards. If you're pointing to the N for New York, but you're 1 letter off, right? And you hit the O instead, I'm going to give you feedback, right? Remember, it's that breakdown between planning and execution. You planned for the N, but when you executed, when you did it, you were off. So I'm going to be the feedback system. I don't need to tell you the autism world is very, very tricky, right? There's lots of different beliefs, lots of different opinions, a lot of things we don't know. One thing that we do tend to agree upon is that sensory is off, right? It's too much or too little sensory information going in at any given time with any given stimulus for any given person. So I have some kids who might blast their music, but the smallest sound of a baby crying or a dog barking just brings them to their knees, right? So we, as the communication regulation partner, CRP, provide the sensory. You were going for that N, whoops, you got a little off towards the O. And I'm going to give you a gesture or a word prompt to get you to the right letter, right? Up, over, to the left, next door, right, to help you get there. We work on that until they're accurate on the 3 boards. Once you're accurate on the 3 boards, we can go to the 26 board. Now, obviously, that's more complicated, right? You have 26 letters. You have 5 rows. You have 5 to 6 letters per row. So it's much more to scan. The eyes are even more complex motor than speech is. So we need to also work on training the eyes to search the board, right? In a movement, it's called saccades. You're searching all over for the right letter. And then there's pursuit, which is when you go right across a row, like if you're reading a book.
Sure.
So you have to
sort of like when you learn how to type. You have to learn where all those letters are on the, because they don't go in a row alphabetically. They're in different order. And then, and I remember when I took typing class when I was in school. I'm that old.
Me too. Me too.
And you used to just hit, A, G, whatever. And then you worked up to 2. Then you worked up to 2,
Right.
then to 3. And we were not allowed to look. We had to only look at the paper. We were not allowed to look at the board. And you're training your brain to know where those letters are.
Right. So now we do, well, that's the same when you start easy and you get hard.
Mhm.
We do train the eyes to look at the board because we want them scanning the board and being
Right.
on.
Yes.
But the same thing is after a while, you practice it and practice it and practice it, typing became automatic for you.
Mhm.
Now, if you ask me and you cover up my keyboard, which is in front of me, where is the J on the keyboard? I would really have to try to visualize the keyboard in my brain to tell you where it is, but my finger knows where it is.
Right.
Because it's become automatic.
Right.
When you practice a motor task over and over and over again, it becomes automatic and it bypasses cognition.
Mhm.
So we teach purposeful motor. We practice the daylights out of it until it becomes automatic. So we practice that on the 3 boards. When they're good at that, we go to the 26 board. Now we can start opening it up a little bit. Like I go back to my New York lesson. I said there were 2 monuments I mentioned that are standout monuments in New York City. Tell me one of them. It's either Statue of Liberty or Empire State Building. Now, notice I said in my lesson, right? Because there's many more monuments.
Yeah.
But I know if they're going up by the E, it's Empire State Building. I know if they're going over by the S, it's Statue of Liberty, right? That's what we call a semi-open question. So we've gradually become more and more open. So we're teaching both the motor, and the motor hierarchy gets more and more and more complex, starting 3 boards, 26 board, laminate board. Here's a laminate board. And then we move to a keyboard. And this is the same one I'm using right now. This is an Apple QWERTY Bluetooth keyboard, right? That I'm using for my own computer. So that's the hierarchy in motor. The cognitive has a hierarchy too of known. There's only one possible answer. Numbers, right? This happened in 1989. There's only one possible answer. Semi-open, more than one possible answer, but not infinite. Prior knowledge, I'm asking you something that I think you might know, but I didn't teach it directly in this lesson. And then a open-ended. So we've got these 2 hierarchies that we're balancing out like a seesaw as we teach it.
Right. So an open question would be like, what do you want for lunch today? Like it could be any kind of a question, or
It can be, I mean,
and it basically the answer could be anything, or it
the answer
means
could be anything, right? Lunch has a certain even predictability to
it
it.
does. It's true. Like, how was your day?
Right.
That more open?
Yeah.
It
Now,
could be
for
anything.
me, in the context of the lesson, I might say, let's talk about your ideal trip to New York City. What would you
Oh,
want?
there you go.
Right? That's very open. That could
Yes.
be like, I want to go up in the Empire State Building. I want to go see a Broadway show. I want to shop.
Right.
I want a New York deli sandwich. It could be anything. I have no idea,
Mhm.
So it could be I want to ride the subway all
Subway,
around.
yeah.
Who knows what that's gonna be.
Mhm.
That's a very open-ended question.
Right.
So,
Right.
but we can't be there until they're accurately pointing to letters on a board. Because ultimately what happens in spelled communication, regardless of methodology, is that the letters replace the speech sounds. You're understanding me right now because my speech sounds are accurate. If I stuffed a banana in my mouth, and I said the exact same thing, my speech is no longer accurate. You're like, Elizabeth, what the heck did you just say? Right?
Mhm.
So it didn't change what I was going to say, but I could no longer articulate correctly. We need this to be accurate. So then when we get to open and I say, what's your ideal day in New York City? All I'm doing is I'm receiving the letters. I'm not predicting. I'm not guessing. I don't have to interpret. If you say, I would like to ride the subway all day long, that's exactly what you mean, right? Some people will say, oh, I think that means he wants to take the subway to Staten Island. And I'm like, what? He did not say that. He said, I would like to ride the subway, period. Right? That's what the message is. I'm not interpreting it. I'm just receiving it. And it's so accurate at that point that all I have to do is receive it. So in the application phase is when somebody is so accurate, then we can get even more complex. Now we can work on your craft of writing, right? Write a persuasive essay, write a technical essay, write a creative story, write a poem. Let me teach you the nuances of poetry writing, Then we can do more advanced thing. We do coaching of the body off of the boards, so that we can help increase independence in activities that involve the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
The motor is really what is causing the
So
most.
if it's since it's motor, would it help for them to be doing more like physical exercises, like lifting weights, or I don't know what?
I love exercise. When people ask me, what can I do? If I can't get to a practitioner right away, or I can't, there's two huge things you can do for your kid. One is exercise. And with exercise, I want full body engagement. Trampoline, treadmill, those things are okay. There's nothing wrong with it, but those things move you. I want things that require coordination. So doing calisthenic type exercises, like really CrossFit is a great, or it doesn't have to be, exactly CrossFit, but that idea, let's do 10 sit-ups. Now we're going to do a set of step ups, on the stepper thing.
Yeah.
It's a step up 1 foot, step up 2 feet, step one, step back, but I want you to do it in this order, right? Or doing a jumping jack. Now, saying to a kid who's apraxic, do a jumping jack is not going to work. We have to break that down and teach them how to do a jumping jack. Sometimes that starts with how to jump. So we break down, bend your knees, lean forward on your toes, spring up, right? Then we do, once the jump is down, jump and spread your legs. Now bring your legs together. Now bring your hand up, just bring one, and maybe another person's giving a target, right? So they're just doing this. Then you bring yours together like this. Now we put it all together. I've made that process very short, but we break down and we teach those steps. Those things are amazing, not only for more motor control, but they're really regulating, right? Between motor and cognitive, if you think of it like a seesaw, in the middle is the fulcrum, right? The balance is the seesaw. That's regulation. If you're pushing too hard on motor without support, you're going to get dysregulated. If you're pushing too hard on cognitive or not stimulating cognitive enough, you're going to get dysregulated.
Yeah. So dysregulation is a big thing too. I always hear that whoever your communication partner is that's working with you has to also be regulated, right? So explain what the regulation is. What do they mean?
The regulation is your homeostasis. Doesn't mean happy, doesn't mean, but you're at homeostasis. You're kind of, good equilibrium. If that gets out of whack, that's dysregulation. And there's really two types of regulation. There's state dysregulation, your physical regulation. So are you hungry or hangry, right?
That was me yesterday.
I know people with a straight up personality change when they're hangry, right? And boy, like a good protein bar in your back pocket is a lifesaver, right? So are you hangry? Are you sick? Are you tired? Are you too hot or too cold? A lot of our folks, especially this summer where it's sweltering, when they're hot, they're in a state of
yeah. And it's been 100 degrees here in New Jersey for 2 weeks.
Exactly.
A lot of cranky people.
Yeah. And everybody gets like that. I mean, you're not going to perform your best if you're sick. I right now have seasonal allergies. If I forget to take my little allergy pill, I come in and I'm just like slugging through my work until all of a sudden I realize, and I'm much better when my head's not pounding and my eyes are not itching, right? So state dysregulation is one thing. And then we have emotional dysregulation. So obviously things like being sad, depressed, scared, anxious are going to dysregulate you, but also happy can be dysregulating,
Mm,
right? Like think of that lottery winner who just is falling out, looking, crazy, screaming, can't
yeah,
even talk. That's happy dysregulation.
right.
The kid who can't sleep the night before Christmas or the night before a vacation or something like that because they're so amped up, that's dysregulation. The kid who's just gotten kind of loopy because they've done something that was exciting, but they've done it too many times and now they're kind of spun
Oh,
up. Like
mhm,
little kids get like that.
mhm,
Sometimes our folks get like that. Like they're happy, and now that happy is just spun up and they can't get out of doing something over and over again.
right.
So we want to keep that regulation. And there's a reason why in S2C we started saying CRP, which is a communication regulation partner,
Got it.
because we help support communication, but just as importantly, we support regulation because it's difficult for you to communicate if you're not regulated.
Right. I've read several books written by parents, and one of them she was trying to show the school that her son could spell, and um, one of the people in the room, he wanted him to leave because he knew that he didn't believe it, that this was real. And he could
Yeah.
pick up on it. He can like and I always said this about Robbie. He had this sixth sense where he could pick up on people. I hear a lot of people say it. They feel like your energy, and and he could pick up on it. And he wanted him to leave first before he could spell. So
Right.
that sounds like a dysregulation thing to me.
So people around you can dysregulate you, and as a communication partner, you can either regulate or dysregulate. So for myself, if I'm having a bad day or I'm cranky about something or I'm tired, I have to either like lock that up, compartmentalize it before I go into a session, or if it's so much, I can't be around it. I mean, my dad passed away 5 years ago.
Mhm.
I couldn't spell with anyone for a good couple of weeks because I was just too sad.
Sure.
And I don't need my kids to worry about my emotional state, right?
Right.
I'm here to support theirs.
Hmm.
I was just too sad to be able, I couldn't compartmentalize and be
Hmm.
around that. So I just didn't do any spelling for those 2
Right.
weeks.
Right.
One thing that is tricky for parents when we teach them, because in S2C it's very important to us
Hmm.
that we coach parents, that we coach other people to be CRPs, is
Hmm.
communication is a 24/7 deal. And I
Hmm.
don't live in your house, so you need to learn how to do this.
Hmm.
Is that parents either are nervous
Sure.
and they just want this so badly, right? That they're just like, more than anything in this world, I want to hear my kid communicate. So when they approach the board, they're like,
Yeah. Yep.
they're like,
Sure.
they forget to do any coaching.
Yeah.
They get stumbled up. As soon as they make a mistake, they get anxious about that mistake, and it just starts to spiral in their own anxiety, and then their kids' anxiety goes up. And
Hmm.
many parents will say to me, "Oh my gosh, you're so patient. You're so this and that." I'm like, "It's not my kid.
Yeah.
Your kid knows how to push your buttons because they."
That is
I have a
true.
34-year-old son who lives in Taiwan now, and with a text, he can push my buttons, and I'm not as patient with him as I am with your kid.
Yeah.
So all of those things come into play. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And if
Yeah.
there's
Sure.
somebody in the room, I mean, when you're in a hostile environment, and I always say that our folks who, because they can't speak, they've been listening and observing their whole lives. And in fact, it becomes a survival skill, right?
Hmm.
Use nice words, but don't mean them. Are
Yeah.
you saying, "Hey, buddy, let's go on back and do some spelling," or you're like, "Hey, buddy, okay." That's two very different tones,
Hmm.
and and they know who believes in them. And I always say they're the best BS detectors that I know. Not
For sure.
because
Yeah.
it's
I'm just thinking, a parent
survival.
first coming in is either going to be like really anxious because they want it to work, or they're afraid it's not going to work.
Right.
Right. And then when it does work, they probably get way too excited. Or
Right.
they start crying,
Yeah,
there's so many emotions that could be going on. So now,
absolutely.
speaking of parents, though, do you train parents as well, or no? How does that work?
100%. Oh, absolutely. They're the most important communication partner, right? Because you're going to have CRPs come and go, right? Any parent who has had support for their kid, whether it's professionals or aides, those folks come and go from your life. And it's a little bit of a bummer when you get someone who's skilled who moves on.
Sure.
And I try to encourage people to think, well, look at how many amazing people you're putting out into the universe. I mean, one dad said it best. He said, "We have launched many careers out of our basement." And I loved his attitude about it.
Mhm.
But you are not going anywhere. And you as a parent, we really, really want you to be comfortable being a CRP. And it's going to take time and practice. And it's like any motor skill, right? If I want to be a good pianist, I need to play the piano every day and practice. If you're going to be a good CRP, you need to practice. We say aim for every day. It doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 10, 20, 30 minutes, depending on what you've got. But that will help you get good.
So
And
wait, so you're saying
well,
you put the parents through the same training as one of your practitioners would go
no,
through? No.
no.
Oh, okay.
So we do have a parent training that's a that we do, that's a 5-month 10 session, how to support your kid both on and off the boards, right? And
Mhm.
we talk not only to help you with spelling, but other things as well, like motor loops when you're stuck saying the same thing over and over again, or what happens with dysregulations and how to come out of those. So it's broader than just spelling, but any practitioner who's trained can help support a parent. So the reason it's not, even the parent cohort is not the same as training. For practitioner training, we're training you to work with any person who walks through your door, young or old, regardless of their profile, their communication needs. So that's a much broader, much more in-depth training. For you as a parent, you just need to become an expert in your own kid. And you're already an expert in many ways. Now we need to teach you how to work with your own child with their various strengths and areas of need specifically, which is not the same as you supporting any other person. So it's much more focused. And whether we're training a parent or a caregiver or a sibling, you just need to be, your child specific. So it's a little bit different. But
Um,
yeah, early on, like in my practice, I also have, besides the nonprofit, I have a private clinic in Herndon, Virginia, called Growing Kids Therapy Center. And very early on, we start parents on the boards. You don't have to wait till your kid is fluent, and we want you right there practicing
mhm.
and going alongside. In fact, anyone I sit down with, I feel like I have two clients. I have the non-speaker who's becoming a speller, and I have the family member or members. They're equally as important.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's an influencer who has a kid that is doing spelling sessions now, and she always writes Thursday spelling days, and I was like, no, every day should be spelling day. Why is he only spelling when he sees his practitioner on Thursdays? Why is he not spelling for you all week long? And I laugh at that because I took piano lessons and I didn't practice. I only played on the days when I had a lesson,
This is
and that's why
also
I
why
didn't get
I
very
am
good at
not.
it.
This is why I'm a speech language pathologist and not a pianist.
Yeah,
And exactly. And I joke around like I can't get fit going to the gym by just thinking of going to the gym. I actually go to the gym, and I have to go regularly, right? You can't just go once for one whole day and be like, yes, I'm done.
right.
And you have to make the commitment to
Mhm.
go regularly. And so it really truly is a motor skill, just like any other motor skill you've ever learned. The beautiful thing is you can acquire that motor skill at any time. We've had people who've started spelling in their 50s, which is
Mm,
amazing.
yeah.
We start as young as 5. At 4, 4.5, we'll do a consult with a parent to get them ready for spelling. Typically, we start at 5. I really want folks to give good early intervention a chance and see what happens. with that support.
Mhm.
But we'll start at as early as 5, and there's no end age that someone is.
So when somebody comes for their first lesson, whether they're 5 or whether, I mean, the first person I knew that ever did this, their son was 33 years old and he finally
Yeah.
learned how to communicate. What do you do in the beginning? Do you assess? I guess what I'm asking is, does it work for everybody? Do you have kids that are just cognitively, they just don't get it and it doesn't work for them?
It works for everybody who fits our profile of having this motor basis, this apraxia.
And
And
how can you tell?
after a while, you recognize the profile of what someone apraxic looks like we were saying earlier, that I can see it in the airport. Right? But I can also, try things. Like there's some people who have better motor control. Every once in a while, I get somebody who sits down and they're kind of an unreliable speaker, and I'm like, so I might ask them to do a novel task and see if they can do it quickly and easily. If they can, that's a different situation. I one time had a girl who came to an outreach I was doing, and she came into the room with sort of this flourish. She had a side ponytail, and she said, "I'm an 80s girl." And I thought right away, you're not a spelling girl, right? Because her motor was too coordinated. Her speech was, very clear, regular cadence, all of the things. And in her case, I put on my old speech and language traditional hat. And I said, look, you're here for the 3 days. I'll help support you here. But I told the parents, the good news is you don't need an S2C practitioner. You just need a really good speech language pathologist who does language work, not speech work, language work. Because she did have language issues. We sit down and we do a first session, and that first session is an assessment session. So we still use a lesson, we still coach on the boards, but we're looking for, what do the eyes do? What is the body doing? What's your response to prompting? What's your regulation like? And we're taking all those things into account, because that starts to give the roadmap of how do we use the procedure, which is very standardized in S2C, for you. Do I need to make some of our accommodations? Are you fine? Like I said, sometimes we have to cover a row on the 3 boards. Do you need that or not need that? So we look at it in the context of how we teach it, and what does that individual person look like? What's your tone look like? What's your sitting look like? What's your point look like? What's your hand use look like? We use a pencil in the hand because that gives an artificial finger. Can you hold the pencil? Do you need to hold it like a fist and I'm just going to stick your finger in there? Or can you hold it like a tripod? So we're assessing all those things. And that's why a practitioner has a much broader training, so that they can look at all of those pieces and then know how to support those pieces.
Right. All right. And then, so if somebody wanted to become a practitioner, what are the steps?
So we have standardized S2C practitioner training. So somebody would reach out to training at I-ASC.org. So our organization is I-ASC, stands for the International Association for Spelling and Communication. And our website is I-ASC.org. Don't forget the dash, or you'll end up with avocado growers and you'll learn to make some great guacamole, but you will not learn anything about spelling. So I'm
gonna type it in the bottom. Yeah.
And then for training, you can reach out to the regular I-ASC, you'll reach us, or training at I-ASC.org. We will give you information on it. Training is a 6-month training. Honestly, it could really be a lot longer than that, but it's about 6.5 months. We start with a kickoff weekend and 2 other kickoff evenings, so that we give you all the essentials.
In Virginia?
It's virtual.
It's virtual.
So
okay.
The training is virtual,
Okay.
but we front load all the essentials so you can start working with non-speakers. Someone who goes through practitioner training needs to work with 3 to 5 non-speakers at a minimum as they're going through training, because you need to see a variety of different people so you can see, you get good at how do you assess, how do you implement the skills, how do you do the coaching across different people. Everybody is assigned. We have a very robust faculty of graders, of a cohort leader, of a mentor. Everybody has a mentor who's an experienced S2C practitioner who reviews videos that are turned in every other week
Okay.
of working with spellers. And they give you feedback and how to improve over that time. There's other assignments that you do over the course of the cohort. The training cohorts, which is a group, are 10 to 15 people generally who are doing it. And we do a minimum of 12 trainings per year. And we've been doing this for a long time. In August, we will be launching our 54th practitioner training cohort. So we really have it down to a consistency. And I think that's where my old university background comes in, to say everybody needs to be trained the same way, the same materials, because we need to be standardized. We have such a mobile society. I was in South Africa and working with some people out there in an outreach, and a family who I saw in Virginia had moved to Cape Town, South Africa, and walked into there, right? And it needs to be consistent from practitioner to practitioner, right? Because we're teaching motor. If everybody starts putting their own little special spin on it, then you get like a recipe that you can't ever replicate. 20 years ago, I made the world's most amazing chili by using a whole bunch of random stuff out of my refrigerator.
Right.
I've never been able to make that
Replicate it. Yep.
and
That's how I cook.
every single time I make chili, my family is disappointed because it's not that really
one.
excellent one, right? But I didn't use a recipe. I cannot make it to save my life.
Right.
We need to have this consistency across people, right? Otherwise, we can't train parents. We can't train CRPs to support spellers. So we keep this consistent. Now, there's lots of accommodations that we make that are standardly made. Sometimes there's a one-off accommodation we have to make to support an individual person, and that's okay too. But as long as those can be communicated and standardized, that everybody who works with that person uses, right? And that's
Do you know how many practitioners you have right now?
Yes, we have over 500 practitioners. We have practitioners in 40 states and 23 countries. And if there isn't one near you, then
how many are in New Jersey? That's what I want to know.
You know, I don't know that number off my head, but it's growing. I can tell you that
one of my moms that come to my retreats, she's going through the training right now.
Great.
And she had to go somewhere. That's why I don't know where she went.
So you do have to do an internship. So the one piece that's, I mean, there's two pieces that are not virtual. Your work with non-speakers is in person. People cannot do virtual training until they've been, or virtual sessions until they've been a practitioner doing in person for a good while, because you have to be able to know it to teach it. So you have to work with your spellers in person, and you do an internship, which does require you going somewhere to do. So we have a handful of approved internship sites, and that's because they're places that have experienced practitioners. They have a robust caseload.
Right.
And you do a 5-day internship.
Yeah, that's probably where she just went. Yeah. One other question is about research. Okay, so there's some naysayers out there, right? Like, for instance, I mentioned Alexandra. Okay, she's the one that first told me about S2C. All right, and she keeps fighting her school to allow them to use S2C with her boys in her school, and the school will give her some pushback. And just something that I've heard through the grapevine is that they'll say there's not enough research to back it up. So is there anything being done research wise that will help move this along? And I will say that the other things that I've heard is people have compared this to Braille. Was, not accepted when it first came out, right? And now everybody knows Braille that's just what you do, right?
Sign language was not accepted when it first came out. I mean, the list goes on.
ABA was not accepted when it first came out. And there was a big fight to get that accepted, So I just see this as the next thing that just needs to be accepted, but they want to see the research.
Do you know what was also not accepted?
Mm.
Educating women. I
Yeah,
mean, for centuries, they didn't educate
you're
women.
right.
They knew through their exact science of phrenology, which was literally feeling the head to let them feel what the brain was like, that women were incapable of learning because our skulls were smaller than men, right? I mean, there's been a lot of things. There's a history of us being wrong, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yes, research is really important to us at I-ASC. It's one of our 4 pillars of increasing access to communication. So
Mhm.
training, education, advocacy, and research. And we collaborate with many researchers. We're getting ready to have our annual conference that we call Motormorphosis, right? The change that comes through motor.
Mhm.
Um, next weekend, and we will have 8 researchers there. 2 or 3 researchers are gathering data while they're there so that people can come and participate in their studies for data collection. There are 2 excellent studies that have been published in highly regarded peer-reviewed journals, both from Dr. Vikram Jaswal, that's Jaswal, out of University of Virginia. So if you do a search for Jaswal non-speaking research, you will find the 2 studies. So we collaborate with researchers who are interested in understanding non-speaking people. I talk to researchers all the time, and many will say, I research autism. And I said, that's great. How many non-speaking subjects do you have? And they're like, well, it's hard to get data. So if non-speaking people are not included in those studies, it's not reflective of the whole population. So that's a problem. There's a growing number of people who are very, very interested in the motor component of autism. Research starting in about 2015 shows that 2/3 of autistic people are apraxic. 1/3 of them that apraxia is significant enough that it affects speech, right? So we know there's speaking autistic people. The only difference between speaking people who are autistic and non-speaking people is that apraxia, right? And even some of my colleagues who are speaking will say, if I get really dysregulated, I can't talk. I'll lose that ability. And they're in that 1/3 that's apraxic, but not enough that it affects their everyday speech, right? So we're learning more and more. We currently are collaborating in 3 other research studies where we help connect researchers to practitioners or spellers so that they can collect data about their communication. So we're always working with research. The thing is, research is a slow process. It takes money to finance the study. So researchers have to apply for grants to get funding, to have the resources available to do it. They have to apply for the Internal Review Board approval. They have to collect the data, analyze the data, get it published. From start to finish, a research study can easily take 3-4 years to conduct. But the good news is there's more and more people who want to do that. And I think there's going to be some studies that are in progress that will be published in the next couple of years. And there's already 2 really very, very strong studies that are out there. But that's important because until we have enough research that we can get S2C in schools and that we can have it covered by insurance, that will be the tipping point for accessibility. Then it will be accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
We have a while to get there, but we are working on that.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this, the S2C?
Since 2015.
Oh, that's not long at all, really.
Yeah. I mean, for it to really be, we're a good 9 years, almost 10 years into it. And, we're gathering momentum. That's the work that we're doing. I-ASC has been around since 2019, and where we've really put in focused energy on consistent training, on advocacy, which is done by non-speaking people. Our Spellers and Allies is our advocacy branch of I-ASC. And that's non-speakers who are 18 and above, who are fluent, who in parallel work with speaking peers have great advocacy. And you can find that on our website. I-ASC.org, and look under Spellers and Allies for their advocacy campaigns. They've done many presentations for communities, for healthcare providers, for all sorts of folks to help them understand more about non-speakers. And then there's the research. And then education we do free webinars every month on I-ASC that are open to anybody to learn more about presuming competence, feeding the brain, coaching the body. When I said feeding the brain, that reminded me when I said there's two things that parents can do right now. One is really good full body exercise, and the second is feeding the brain, talking to your kid at age appropriate levels, reading books out loud, playing podcasts out loud. When you're in the car, you have a captive audience. If you don't know a good podcast for a 12-year-old, Google it. There's plenty of great stuff out there that's both fiction and nonfiction. Audiobooks are amazing. If your kid comes through the kitchen and you're cooking dinner, to say, oh, hey, I'm making pasta for dinner. When the water boils, that will cook the pasta. That means it's at 100 degrees Celsius, 200 and something Fahrenheit. I always forget that one. And it's bubbling, right? Right there. If they just shot through the kitchen, you just explain boiling, right? Mm-hmm. If you're watching your favorite sporting event, say why you like that team, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, this is because this is where I went to college, or this is the football team for our town, or whatever it is.
Even if it seems like they're not paying attention and they're not listening.
Absolutely.
Because they are taking everything in.
And listening doesn't have a look. Cindy, you and I could be taking a walk and having this conversation and not looking at each other and walking side by side. Listen. I could have you in my kitchen and my back's to you while I'm at the stove and you're talking to me and I'm still understanding.
Right.
We've been trained even on Zoom, right? I look right at the person I'm talking to on Zoom because that's been my life training as a listener. Look at them, make eye contact, nod your head.
Correct.
But I'm also an extremely good fake listener. I've raised 5 children, right? I've raised 5 children and I've gone through faculty meetings. I can have this look on my face and nod, and I'm on a beach somewhere.
And you're zoned out. Yes. And and it's funny because I find that if I'm actually looking at you, I probably am zoned out. When I'm not looking at you, I'm actually listening better because I multitask. I have to be like folding laundry or doing something, and I am listening to you. But if I'm just
absolutely. So they are always listening. So feed the brain, exercise the body, those are 2 things that anybody could start doing right now. Talk to your kid at age appropriate level.
The presuming competence is it's so huge. That was such a big eye opener for me because I always just thought that because my son, it's not even so much that he couldn't speak. It's that if I said, Robbie, go throw that in the garbage, he would just like sit there. Like he had he had no idea. But other times he would do it.
But that's also motor.
This is what I'm learning, right? But all those years I didn't know that. So I thought, does he not I don't think he understands what I'm saying. Where meanwhile, he did, he just couldn't do it. And I couldn't understand why it was so inconsistent.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is so many of our folks have been underestimated because we measure, whether it's formally or informally, we measure cognition, intelligence, understanding by performance, right? If it's formal and it's testing, and I used to do so many assessments, right? I can say test items in my sleep. Before you touch the blue shoe, touch the red ball, pat the baby, touch the red square, or put the red square in the blue cup, blah, 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 blah. Say this, do this.
Right.
Every single item of every single test requires a motor response.
Right.
Even if it's touch your nose, close the door. But that could be a 1-step verbal command and a 20-step motor task. For me to open my door from now, I'm sitting at my desk, close to my desk with my legs crossed. The first thing I have to do is uncross my legs. Second thing I have to do is push my chair back, right? Then turn towards the door. I'm at 15 steps before I've even touched the doorknob, and my door is right there.
Right.
That's a breakdown in motor, not a
Right.
breakdown in I understood
And when
you.
you take your kid before the child study team to get them evaluated and they can't put the red ball in the blue, whatever, they assume, oh, they don't get it. They don't understand what I'm saying. They don't
And it's
realize it's motor.
right. And it's often doing a novel task with an unfamiliar person, right? So you've got emotions in there. I don't know you. I'm scared. This is high stakes, right? And all new tasks that they've never done before.
Sure. And the parent is nervous bringing them in too, so they're picking up on that too.
Absolutely. So we consistently give motor evaluations, motor-based evaluations to people who have a fundamental motor issue, and then they have terrible results. We would not give a blind man a visual IQ test.
Right.
But
And
yet
this
we're
is
doing
what's so revolutionary, really, is because we've always seen autism as, cognitive, not
right,
motor.
right. And really, Anne Donlan and Martha Leary started researching this and writing about the motor basis in many autistic people in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's just now getting traction in, mid 2020s. And so change flows like glue. We still have a lot of work to do, a lot of change, a lot of thinking to change, research, all of it. And I think we'll get there, but because there are more and more people from a variety of disciplines who are now looking at the motor component in autism and in other motor sensory disabilities. 70% of our worldwide caseload in S2C are autistic. 30% are something else, usually genetic syndromes, conditions that have a strong motor base to it.
Right.
So we're hoping that we start to see more and more in that other 30%. It's not that just 30% could do it. We're only reaching 30%.
Right.
So it's not just that, but we have to start thinking differently. And I think the more and more motor research comes out, it's going to be very important to shifting that belief.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. All right. That's a perfect spot to end the interview right there, even though I have more questions in my head. I've only had my foundation for 2 years, and then what we've done, I just do little local fundraisers, and I do, so I can do these retreats for the moms. But the more and more I learn about this, I want to move my focus into, S2C. I don't want to be a practitioner, but I would love to maybe pay for somebody to get trained in it.
Great.
Even maybe have a center.
Huge.
So if somebody wants to find a practitioner in their area, all they have to do is go on your website and it lists.
The best bet is to reach out to info at I-ASC to find a practitioner.
Okay.
Info at I-ASC.org. And then if there's no one, we do have some people who are very skilled at virtual coaching,
Okay. So I was going to ask, do people usually have a set place where people come to them, or did they go to the house?
It really varies.
Depends on them.
It varies on the practitioner. And it's sort of just like when you graduate from med school, you might choose to set up a private practice or work in a hospital or teach or whatever. Same thing. We have some people who are in schools, some people who are they go do home visits, some who set up a center. So there's a wide range of how they practice. Some who collaborate together and build a center. Yeah. And after a while, a lot of people who start with home visits end up going center-based because it's just, you spend more time in your car than, and there's advantages to, like my rooms, and I have 5 rooms where we can see people. I can choose the right room for my speller, right? Somebody who's got natural light doesn't do well with overheads. I've got rooms with windows. Some kids, that's way too much and they're looking out the window the whole time. I've got an interior room, right? I don't have to deal with all the fun stuff. And here's your favorite thing that's going to totally distract you in your house. So, there's pros and cons to both.
Right. So if people want to come see you in Virginia, I've heard that you're very, very busy.
I am. It's hard to get in with me. There is a waiting list, and when I have time, I do a lot of traveling because I spread this around the world and across the US and stuff. I try to have a little bit of time in the clinic because I love it, but I've got 3 outstanding practitioners. One who especially does a lot of out of towns where people come and they come for 2 days. So a lot of times they arrive Sunday night, spend the night, have 2 sessions Monday, 2 sessions Tuesday, go home Tuesday night. Sometimes I do those. Kelly Berg, who's also one of our cohort leaders and mentors, she's phenomenal, and she does them. So folks can certainly, especially if they're East Coast, we have people who fly. I mean, right now we've had a family over from England, so folks do come here, and I do what I can. But 95% of my work is in the nonprofit because, in the clinic, I can only help the people who I directly support, and through the nonprofit, I can help spread this, access around the world. And that's really that moment where my guy was like, you did the best you knew how to do. This is my living amends, is to get this out to as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right. So contact info, what's the website?
Yeah.
Oh, we did it. It's I-ASC.org.
And then the emails are info at
Yep.
I-ASC.org, and then training.
Okay.
And my emails is Elizabeth at, so it's all the same.
Okay. All right. Terrific. All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on here today and filling us in on everything. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To learn more about our children's book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, or to learn more about what we do at Robbie's World Foundation, simply visit our website at robbiesworldbook.com.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.